Is Michigan being undervalued? Good question. No.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. Gosh, I love it so very much. Texas is going to be right back in the fold, folks. Right back in the fold. And can a non-quarterback win the Heisman? I'll give you 3 names of people to consider there, but it's going to be a tough battle. And winning in the Big Ten, very hard. Michigan knows what that takes, though. Sherrone Moore has seen it from kind of a secondary leadership position as offensive coordinator. Now he is the head coach. I am pretty bullish on Sherrone Moore. The coaching job he did in the last 2 games, in which he was a combined 33-point underdog and won 2 games outright against teams that were college football playoff caliber. With that Michigan roster, the progress that Davis Warren showed, everything Michigan did this year at the end of the season, the Wolverines should feel really good about what they have going forward. But their win total, according to our friends at FanDuel, is just 8.5. Now, the teams that played in the national championship game this past season, Ohio State and Notre Dame, their win totals before the year were 10.5. The team that was number one most of the season, that be the Oregon Ducks, their win total was 10.5. That doesn't mean Michigan can't surprise some people here, but 2025 isn't the year. I am going to ring the bell. I'm going to stand on a soapbox and lobby for Michigan really hard in 2026. But there are 2 reasons why I think they are appropriately valued there. Their schedule is not in and of itself insanely brutal. You know, they miss Oregon. They don't have Penn State on the schedule. They do have Michigan State on the road, and just watch out for that one. But Ohio State at home, apparently that's an easy win. I mean, I don't know. We'll find out. But it's the quarterback situation for me that makes me look at Michigan and say, this is still going to be kind of not a rebuilding year, but how about a next step sort of year, but not the step. Because remember, J.J. McCarthy did not win a national championship his first year as Michigan starter. They lost in the college football playoff. But then he came back the next year, then they won the national championship. And the quarterback room at Michigan's fascinating because they've got Bryce Underwood, who they flipped from LSU, number 1 overall quarterback in the class of 2025. Huge deal for the Wolverines to be able to land him, and they can partially thank Dave Portnoy for that. But the ability of Michigan to be at a Big Ten championship level this year, I don't trust them to do that because you've got a quarterback kind of debate, discussion. It's better than what you had last year when it was Davis Warren or Alex Orji or Jack Tuttle. It was, I don't know. I mean, not a lot of high-end options there. Bryce Underwood could be a high-end option. Now, they brought in Mikey Keene from Fresno State, a transfer who this past year completed a lot of throws. He's not a super big guy. He's just 5'11", 200 pounds, but he completed 70% of his passes. 18 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, though. Each of his last 2 years, he's had double-digit interceptions, and now he's going to the Big Ten. So that's not someone who I'm placing the weight of the world on his shoulders to say, oh, Michigan's suddenly going to outperform expectations, win the Big Ten, go to the playoff. And Michigan could wind up being a playoff team this year, but I don't have them this year in that top tier of teams because of the quarterback situation, and they might end up making a change in the middle of the year. If I were Michigan, and I know this is not how coaches are wired, but this is how I'm wired, always thinking about the long game, you know? If Michigan were to do what I'd tell them to do, just start Bryce Underwood. Have Mikey Keene there if Underwood really struggles and, you know, he needs to reset his head a little bit. Like, that's fine. But you should be building towards that 2026 season. Because remember, this is also a defense that is losing Will Johnson and Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. That's a lot of high-end talent to lose from a team that just went 7-5. You have to take a step forward offensively, and the quarterback play for Michigan doesn't have to be great. But remember, Cade McNamara came up short in the playoff, and J.J. McCarthy came up short the first time and got there the second time. J.J. McCarthy's a first-round quarterback. So even if you're not going to go out and have these huge, massive numbers for Michigan to put them in that Big Ten championship discussion, the quarterbacks that were in the Big Ten title game last year were Dylan Gabriel. He'd been around for a little while. He's played more games than anyone in college football history, by the way, and thrown for more touchdowns too, or accounted for more total touchdowns, I believe, is the stat record that he's got because he was around for so long. And Drew Aller, who himself was a veteran last year and will be even more veteran this season, who won the national championship, Will Howard. So if you look at Mikey Keene and say, oh, he's going to elevate Michigan to the next, they're back in the Big Ten championship hunt, I don't see that. And I also don't expect that of Bryce Underwood in his first year, similar to Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. I think that's kind of how Michigan should approach this 2025 season is, hey, let's start the true freshman. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to get us excited and set the stage for a 2026 year in which their roster, I think with how they're recruiting, I mean, Sherrone Moore is doing a great job on the recruiting trail. I think they have the ability to be the best team in the Big Ten in 2026. I really believe that. It's not going to be easy. Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State are not just falling off a cliff. Maybe USC or Michigan State or Nebraska or someone elevates into that top tier, but Michigan's got the ability when they are right to just be better than everybody else. We saw that a couple of seasons ago. But so the quarterback factor is one thing, but then the roster turnover is another. I actually don't think the schedule for Michigan is all that brutal. They do have to go at USC and at Nebraska. But again, are those the most brutal road games? I think their toughest games easily in conference play are at Michigan State and Ohio State, of course, maybe not in that order. I believe, again, that Michigan State's going to beat someone you don't expect them to. Last year was Iowa. I don't know that it would be Michigan this year, but that was a competitive game when they played this past season. I think the Spartans can take a step forward. That doesn't mean they'll be at Michigan's level necessarily, but I also want to give Michigan some credit because I've ripped on them in the past for their non-conference scheduling and how weak it was, and it wasn't any fun for college football fans. They're playing these cupcake games. They've flipped the script in that regard. They had Texas on their home field last year. They're going to Oklahoma this year. Michigan's going to play a football game in Norman. How about that? That is fantastic. Round of applause. Thank you, Michigan administrators, and Sherrone Moore, and everyone that goes into making that decision happen for putting a marquee non-conference game on your schedule. That's all I want from any Power 4 school, is have a game that the outside world is going to be interested. Your fans are going to be interested in any game that you play because, well, they are your fans. But the outside world, well, not so much. If you're playing a combination of Coastal Carolina and Middle Tennessee State and all these random school, Bowling Green and whoever, that's no fun. But I'm bullish on Michigan in 2026. They start Bryce Underwood, develop him this year. They're going to be phenomenal. But their quarterback situation, I go, I don't know. That's not a Big Ten championship team to me with that at quarterback. Even with the system that they run, they have to get more. And you're just going to be going through either, I think, a lower ceiling guy in Mikey Keene or a freshman in Bryce Underwood making mistakes. So Michigan, I think it's not a soft reset, just kind of hold steady, maybe take a baby step forward, and then 2026, I think they'll pop. Let me know your thoughts below or hit me up on Twitter. Texas, speaking of the Longhorns, is going to be right back in the fold. First, this episode brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was, past tense, dealing with piles of paperwork, frustrating forms, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And now taxes is, present tense, easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress. And you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you just go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is taxes with Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Texas is the only program in the country that has made the Final Four in college football 2 years in a row. They scraped by ASU, but guess what? It's the end result that matters most, and they had the end result that they were looking for in that quarterfinal game. But Texas brings back an incredibly strong core. Now, questions along the offensive line? Yes, absolutely. You lose a couple of guys that were instrumental. There's some turnover. It's not as if Texas has struggled in recruiting necessarily the last couple of cycles, but their defensive line is going to be one of the best in all of college football. And look, I think Texas's defense, I said many times this past season, they're the most underrated unit in the country. Now you look and go, huh, Jahdae Barron, oh, he was really good. Andrew Makuba, oh, wow, he was really good. But Colin Simmons, that guy's a stud. Anthony Hill, yeah, he's really good too. There are a bunch of players. They bring back another safety member or safety from that secondary. I think Texas has all the foundational parts to be a very sustainable program. Steve Sarkisian is recruiting at a top 5 level year in and year out. I mean, that's just the expectation that Longhorn fans should kind of have is, yeah, this is where it should be. This is where it always should have been. Well, Sark's got you right there, giving you a chance year in, year out. And yes, Sark needs to figure out in big games how to score in the red zone. But once he does that, Texas will be golden. And in 2025, I am as high on Texas as I am any team in the country in spite of everything they lost. They almost won the SEC this past year. They didn't, famously, but they did that amidst losing a bunch of NFL talent. Xavier Worthy, Byron Murphy, like bunch of guys that were mega talented, but they've got those replacements waiting in the wings. So they start, speaking of high-profile games that, round of applause, hat tip to the athletic departments, coaches, and the players who, of course, will play in the game. Texas Game 1, August 30th at Ohio State. If you're not excited already, I don't know what you're doing listening to or watching this show. That's just a great college football game. A rematch of the semifinal. It is in Columbus. You're going to have new quarterbacks on both sides who are 5-star recruits and mega talents, and Arch Manning over here and Julian Sayin most likely for Ohio State over there. Oh boy. Then we're all going to tune out of Texas for a little while. But their SEC schedule for the second straight year is incredibly navigable. It's so workable. This is not a Florida gauntlet or anything close to it. So the roster combined with the schedule makes me go, I struggle to see how Texas falls off. Like, what does it look like? Arch Manning getting hurt? Because he's clearly too talented to not have some level of productivity that allows Texas's offense to succeed. And Sark is a pretty good play caller. But man, the SEC schedule they've got feels like they got to capitalize on this. This is their second year in the conference. And I tell you what, it's not going to be like this forever. Eventually, you will get a Florida-type schedule. And speaking of that, they begin in the swamp against the Gators. That's an interesting matchup because you've got Arch Manning on one side, who is a less-known commodity, than DJ Lagway on the other. I mean, DJ Lagway was phenomenal for Florida when healthy a year ago. I didn't even think they'd make a bowl game. Oh, what do you know? They won 8 games. That included a bowl game victory, but guess what? That counts because some of us, like me, still enjoy bowl season. So they go at Florida before they host Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma's got a new offensive coordinator. They've got a new quarterback. Texas has got a new quarterback, but not a new offensive coordinator. Sark is still right there. So the players might be a little bit different, but hey, the offensive system, it's right there. It's not like Arch hasn't seen it. It's not like they've had a revolving door of, oh, this offense and these signals and those calls. No, he should be incredibly well-versed, and he's easily the most hyped backup quarterback of my lifetime. But alas, it is finally going to arrive come 2025. So Oklahoma, that's an interesting game. Then at Kentucky, at Mississippi State, host Vanderbilt. You talk about just strolling along. Texas should cruise. You got 2 road games in there. Now, remember my take on Mississippi State. I've said this before. I'll say it again. They are going to beat someone who no one thinks they should, except for me. That's going to happen in 2025. Just remember that. And Texas has to go to Starkville. The cowbells will be out and about. So just maybe put that one away in the old memory banks for a moment. Vanderbilt, then they go at Georgia. It didn't go well when Georgia came to Austin a season ago. But that Georgia game is the only one I look at on the schedule and say, I've got a 90% confidence interval that Texas loses that game. That's it. They end with Arkansas and Texas A&M. Both of those games are at home. Gosh, I love that Texas A&M is right there in rivalry week. That's just one. That game this past year, the environment, how it all played out, it was just chef's kiss. That is college football lore at its finest. Truly. I am so happy. Not that other conferences took a hit in realignment, but I am so happy that realignment has brought us Texas and Texas A&M. That rivalry has never gone away. The game just went away. But the vitriol between those two fan bases, it didn't go anywhere. Did not go anywhere whatsoever. So that schedule for Texas, once again, is really, really favorable. You got your final 2 games of the year at home. You've got a bye before you go on the road against Georgia. I mean, it's just not a gauntlet. There's no Alabama in there. There's no LSU in there. There's no Ole Miss in there. I mean, there's no Tennessee. None of them. You miss all of those teams again, and that's how the scheduling rotation works, of course, but they got to take advantage of it. And I tell you, if they win that first game against Ohio State, you're probably looking at another 11-1 season. Even if they were to beat Ohio State and Georgia in the same year, there'd probably be a stumble in there. But hey, 12-0 would certainly be feasible if they win those games. But they're both on the road, true road games. That's difficult. But if you just win one, I think Texas is all but a lock to the SEC championship game. So yeah, I love the setup for Texas. Absolutely love the setup that they've got going into this year. And it really comes down to Arch Manning. Quinn Ewers this past year, in the biggest moment, his best individual play as a Texas Longhorn was, yes, a great throw. Arch can make the throw. But it was what Quinn Ewers did at the line. Sees pressure, makes the check, get in the right protection, and give Matthew Golden time to get open down the field for a touchdown on 4th and 13 against Arizona State. That is what Texas now has a question mark surrounding on their offense. Because Quinn Ewers had played a lot of football at Texas, but just a lot of football. He's been around college football for a long time. Arch has been around, but he hasn't played as much. How long does it take Arch to get those details down? How long does it take him to be able to understand what he's looking at, to read defenses, make the right checks, get in the right protection, into the right play or whatever? Those are the little things that you or I don't necessarily see on a play-to-play basis, but it's always out there. And when you've got a veteran quarterback like Quinn Ewers, Steve Sarkisian can rely on him very heavily in that regard. So I don't question Arch Manning's physical traits, that he's ready to go. I just question whether he's going to be able to do all those little details well. And certainly, he's never started a full season of college football. So there's an inherent question mark with Arch Manning there. But I am incredibly high on Texas. I'm not making season predictions here in February. That's crazy town. I don't know how I'm not putting Texas in the SEC championship game. I really don't. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter at AskMcLaughlinCFB. So last year, Heisman Trophy winner, not a quarterback. Can that happen again? This past year for the Heisman Trophy was one of the most unique races in recent memory because you had not one but 2 guys having these incredible historic seasons that are gunning for the Heisman Trophy, and neither one was a quarterback. And it was incredibly clear. It's either going to be Travis Hunter or Ashton Genty. It's definitely not going to be a quarterback. I mean, Dylan Gabriel was a Heisman finalist just because he was a quarterback. His numbers were good. They weren't great. He was the quarterback of the Big Ten champs, undefeated #1 team in the country. That's why he got there. But for Travis Hunter to have won it and Ashton Genty to have, sparked such a heated debate made me wonder. Could we have a second straight year of a non-quarterback winning the Heisman? It's tricky. There are a lot of great quarterbacks in college football. The favorite is Garrett Nussmeier, according to our friends at FanDuel at LSU. And look, I'm bullish on Nussmeier. If you give me my top 5 quarterbacks in the SEC, Nussmeier's probably #1 right now. Maybe that changes a couple weeks into the season and such. But I think for the non-quarterbacks, there are 3 guys to me I would keep my eye on. #1 is Jeremiah Smith. This is an easy one. I mean, true freshman that goes for 70 receptions, over 1,300 yards, 76 receptions, over 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, makes the biggest play in the national championship game to clinch it for Ohio State. Like, everything about him, if you don't watch him a ton, I don't know what college football you're watching if he's never on your TV, but, Ohio State plays some games that aren't that exciting, frankly, because, well, they can beat the crap out of teams like Akron or Marshall or whoever, but he is so worth the hype. And he's going to be around for 2 more years. 2 more years we're going to have Jeremiah Smith in college football. It's one of the things that separates it from a sport like college basketball where guys can just go one and done and you're around them for an hour. I mean, Cooper Flagg at Duke made news the other day because he said, I might want to come back to Duke. Everyone's going, wait, what? Coming back for another season? That's how it used to be in college basketball, but that's how it still is in college football. I pray that never changes because Smith is ready for the NFL right now. Any coach will tell you that. But He's got to play for 2 more years. Them's the rules. So he'd be the number one position guy who I'd look at and say, yeah, he could win the Heisman Trophy as a non-quarterback. That's player number one. Player number two, I'm going back to the running back place here, running back position. Give me Jeremiah Love. I mean, this guy is going to be, I believe, the first running back taken off the board in the 2026 NFL draft class. Because Ashton Jeanty will be the first running back off the board. He absolutely should be in this year's cycle. But next year's draft, I don't know how it isn't Jeremiah Love. I think from an NFL prospect standpoint, Love actually has better traits than Jeanty. He's, I think, just a little bit longer, a little bit. I mean, Genty's pretty darn explosive, so I don't want to get into those sorts of comparisons. I'll just make some people angry for no reason. But Love this past season, over 1,100 yards on the ground, almost 7 yards a carry. And of course, he was trudging through the playoff game because he wasn't 100%. Still had the 98-yarder. Still was able to make a big play in a playoff game. Give me that guy at full strength over the course of a season. Why can't he run for close to 2,000 yards? Plus, Notre Dame's resetting at quarterback. I don't know that they're 100% sure who it's going to be this year. Here's what they do know. We've got Jeremiah Love in the backfield, and we're going to give him the football a lot. And Notre Dame like to run the football. Running, defense, special team, that's what Marcus Freeman does. Worked pretty well this past year. Made it to the national championship game. And, lost by less than 2 touchdowns. So, yes, they got down big, but of course, climbed their way back, and the final score is indeed the thing that matters the most. But I look at Jeremiah Love and say, okay, he's the most physically gifted running back in all of college football. He's in an offense that should allow him to thrive, and he's going to be on a team that'll have a great offensive line. They had all these guys transfer out along the offensive line, like Pat Coogan, who went to went to Indiana, rather, but that's because he started for a guy that got hurt before the season. He wasn't supposed to be the starter. So Notre Dame should have one of the best offensive lines in college football. Head coach that wants to run the ball. Talented running back. Yeah, Jeremiah Love, I think that's also a pretty easy pick. Now, I dug deep for this next one. I wanted to give some love to the guys on the defensive side of the ball. Keep your eye on Dylan Stewart at South Carolina. 6.5 sacks last year. 5-star recruit. Huge get for Shane Beamer. After the season, they quickly announced he had a new NIL deal that would keep him at South Carolina, because I can guarantee you everybody and their mother wanted him to transfer to their school. Alas, he did not. He's got Lenora Sellers at quarterback on the other side, who could also work his way into the Heisman Trophy discussion. But South Carolina as a team has got the chance to be pretty darn good, and Stewart could be that sort of guy. When you look at some of the leaps that guys make from year 1 to year 2, when they're highly rated recruits, there's a jump. That sophomore leap rather than a sophomore slump, I think, could be huge for Dylan Stewart. Don't be surprised if this is a guy who leads the country in sacks. Now, he loses Kennard, his defensive line running mate, of course. But for South Carolina, I am so interested to see what the Gamecocks are able to do. Come down to Lenora Sellers, because I don't know that the defense will be quite as good, but Dylan Stewart himself could be better. So if you want a defensive guy, I thought about putting Caleb Downs in here, but I don't know that Downs can rack up the sort of stats at safety that are necessary to get yourself into that conversation. I mean, Will Johnson's as good of a corner as the college game has produced going into the NFL draft in the last several years. There was never any serious buzz. Now, he also had injuries to deal with this year, but I'd say Dylan Stewart is among the top defensive players in the entire country, and don't be surprised if he pops off and makes a push at a Heisman Trophy run. It's really hard. You have to be freakishly good. Aiden Hutchinson levels of good, but Stewart is that kind of talent. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.